We have with us today a Hitchcock scholar to be chatting about the film with us. My colleague from City University of New York, Professor Joe McElhaney. Joe teaches at Hunter College and at the Graduate Center. He's the author of a number of books, and among them is The Death of Classical Cinema, Hitchcock, Lang, and Minnelli. He's also published extensively in journals on Hitchcock as well as a set of other subjects.
A novel called The Wheel Spins by Ethel Lena White that had been published in 1936. And the story situation of The Wheel Spins, of The Lady Vanishes, has its basis in an urban legend of an English mother and daughter coming to Paris in 1889 for the exposition. They check into a hotel. The mother becomes ill. The daughter leaves the hotel to find medical help. When she returns to the hotel, the mother is gone, disappeared, and everyone at the hotel who has seen the mother claims never to have seen her. You checked in this hotel alone, etc. And a novel published in 1913 had been based on this situation, and then most likely Hitchcock had read a short story about Alexander Woollcott called The Vanishing Lady that also used the same basic story situation. And many storytellers, many novelists, filmmakers have used this to varying degrees over the years.
But you know, now as we look back almost 70 years later, this is also a film that has a strong political aspect to it, despite, you know, the tonal emphasis on the comedy and on some of the thriller elements. What do you make of that and Hitchcock?
Well, it's interesting because the film was made at such a volatile political moment and the real possibility of war with Hitler. However, the reviews I've seen in both the English press and the American press from the film's initial release don't really bring up the political dimension to the film that strongly. They praise the film very heavily. It was a huge success critically, financially. Hitchcock received the New York Film Critics Prize for Best Director of the Year for The Lady Vanishes. But what's so powerful about the film, so strong about the film for critics at the time was simply this miraculous mix of melodrama and comedy, and Hitchcock's skill at storytelling here. They don't really bring up the political dimension. However, with 70-year hindsight, and in fact, the critical discourse on the film today is almost totally fixated on reading the film as a political and social allegory, which seems so clear to us now. And return to the couple, it's quite clear that coupling in the film represents, especially Iris and Gilbert, this idea of what is needed to fight in the presumably upcoming war with the Nazis. What image, and moreover, what image of England do we need to present and do we need to create in order to do the necessary battle that's forthcoming? So Iris and Gilbert represent that very, very strongly, very fully. And in fact, Iris has to reject her suitor, who we see at the end of the film, in a bowler hat and looking very stuffy, like a conservative member of parliament, and go to Gilbert, who's very strongly connected to internationalism. You know, he's connected to folk culture, folk music and dancing. He's very English, but at the same time, he's not hermetic. He's not an isolationist, shall we say,
absolutely,
but embracing internationalism in general. Whereas Mr. Todd Hunter seems quite clearly set up as a total isolationist, all too willing to surrender at the end of the film, waving the white handkerchief.
Absolutely the case.
Clearly meant to symbolize a kind of waving of the white flag.
Yeah, no. I think to us that is obvious, and the way in which, you know, again, with all the advantages of hindsight, that this is an allegory so easy to read that you don't even have to point it out about Central Europe, and whether the Nazi Party is never mentioned, or the fascists in Hungary are never mentioned, but they're all so clearly referenced. And
well, obviously the 30s are among other things, certainly in terms of Hollywood cinema, associated with romantic comedy, with screwball comedy. And also musicals, the Astaire Rogers films in particular. And in fact, Margaret Lockwood and Michael Redgrave meet cute in a way that's strikingly similar to the way that Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers meet in Top Hat. Fred Astaire is tap dancing in the hotel room above Ginger Rogers. She complains about the noise. They meet, have a confrontation of sorts. In The Lady Vanishes, of course, Michael Redgrave has his folk dancers dancing above Margaret Lockwood. And in fact, I remember the review that the film got in the New York Times from Frank Nugent was, he said he didn't know whether to praise the film for being a brilliant melodrama or a brilliant comedy. It seemed to be equal parts of both of these. The film in relation to that is not just Gilbert and Iris, who are this idea of of a New England, or let's just say a positive image of England. Miss Froy is absolutely central as well, hence the importance of the final shot where they come into the office and she is there. And the final shot was actually as of her, not of the couple, and she's looking at both of them and then sort of shaking their hands as though she's bestowing her blessing on this new kind of couple. But she is extremely English as well. And so it's young, it's old, and it's also Charters and Caldecott ultimately become a positive image of England as well. They're thoroughly English in the obsession with cricket, and they seem to be set up as isolationists for a long stretch of time. But when it has to happen, when they have to make a choice, they stay behind. They stand behind Iris and Gilbert and the positive qualities of England. Even the nun herself also finally rejects Ben Drinker. And what she said, I didn't know the old girl was English. You didn't tell me this. So this British patriotism manifests itself there too. But it's interesting that both the nun and I think it's Caldecott, I forget the names, I forget which is which, who both have to take a bullet of some sort as some kind of punishment. He gets it in the hand, she gets it in the leg. But nevertheless, they remain firmly committed to this idea of a strong, new kind of England ready to do battle. And also I think the film, again, typical of Hitchcock, but it requires a certain vigilant spectator as well. That is to say, we don't just observe people looking, but in fact our own look at the film is repeatedly being solicited, and we are asked to think and to interpret for ourselves in the midst of this spectacle, you might say, of looking and interpretation. Which is why the film is, like so much of Hitchcock, is so rich on repeat viewings. You suddenly notice things that you hadn't noticed before. I always love that detail of the waiter on the train who, when Miss Froy and Iris come in for tea, and you see Charters and Caldecott on the right, and you see him putting on the white jacket. On a first viewing, it looks as though these Brits have come in for an afternoon tea. This is usually a slow period. I put my jacket on and wait on them. On a second viewing, the man is clearly aligned with the Nazis, and in fact he's putting on a jacket, most likely because he's replaced someone on that train, and is part of this insidious power working itself on this train itself. There are stories of Wells reportedly going to see this film 11 times when it came out, and possibly he was sort of intrigued by this method of constructing a film as a set of, you might say, mysteries, not so much in terms of the story, but in terms of the style of the film.
Well, and stylistically,